everybody! My name is Carolyn and we are doing another video today. I am always so excited for end of the year videos because I get to see my favorites and excuse my cat. Yeah, so I am very excited to today talk about my did not finishes of the year. And I actually had so many that I had to make 2 videos on this, and it's a little crazy. So 2 parts of this, but I think it's important because I think it just says a lot about my reading taste. So let's start. At this point in my life, I kind of really know my reading taste, and I really do feel like I have a good sense of when I don't want to finish reading a book. I will say that if I did read 50% or more of a book, I do count it as completed, which might be controversial, but I do think that at this point, if I read a book up to 50% and I know I don't like it, there's likely that even if I finish it, I won't like it. So these are books that I didn't finish all the way up to the 50% mark, one reason or another that we will get into. So here we go. The first book is Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. This book is about dragons, and I'm sure you can guess the rest. This book is touted as being more whimsical. The writing is very lyrical and descriptive, and when I read it, what people think is lyrical to me is verbose. In my notes I even wrote, how can you say so much yet so little? And I could not stand another 400 pages of this writing. I couldn't even understand what was going on. So I DNF'd this one probably up to the first chapter. So this one is Bonded by Thorns by Elizabeth Helen. This is about a named Rosalina who, her father kind of goes into the Fey realm. She follows him and trades his freedom for hers, and she has to stay in this castle and break these princess curses. And this is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. This one is just super cringy and written in a very juvenile way. I think even though it's purported to be a romantasy, so at least new adult rating. And I actually have a quote here that I want to read to you, which was about the point where I said I wasn't going to be doing this anymore. And it is, what am I supposed to answer you when you're choking me out, you overgrown tin can? Yeah, I will leave it at that. The rest of her dialogue is just as cringy, so just no. The next book that I didn't finish was A Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson. This is a young adult book about a girl named Stevie Bell who goes to this pretty elusive private school called Ellingham Academy, and she kind of takes it upon herself to solve the mystery of the school. We do get a flashback to the past where the founder of the school, his wife and daughter get kidnapped, and it's been a cold case ever since, and our main character is determined to find out what it is. So this book, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with it. I think young adult me would have loved this book, but today I just find it almost pretentious and just a little bit too precocious, and everything was just kind of boring. This is more of a soft DNF, but it was just boring. It's just boring. They care about boring stuff, they're boring, and when she meets the other students at the school, it gets even more boring, and that shouldn't happen. So there's that one. The next one I DNF'd was another romantasy. Do you see a pattern here? Assistant to the Villain by Hannah Marer. Sort of an office comedy, but set in a fantasy world. Our main character, what's our main character? Her name is Evie, and she goes to work for the resident villain of this world. And I think this is such a cool concept, but I'm honestly thinking with cozy fantasy that there's a very, very fine line for me. I don't like anything that seems too juvenile, and this is exactly what this book is. It's supposed to be an adult book, but honestly it reads extremely YA. This is kind of jarring, right? Because written like a YA book, but her internal monologue is talking about how sexy the main character is and talking about a lot more adult themes of, you know, sex and all that. And it was just very jarring to see that. I'm also thinking that humor in fantasy is also very for me, because in this book the humor was just not good. It was very cringy and it was just painfully unfunny, I think. It has a very sort of campy style of humor, and I think that's just not for me. So there's that one. The next book I DNF'd is Quicksilver by Callie Hart. This one I did talk about in my worst romances of the year, which might be unfair because I did not finish this book. But even if I had finished this book, I guarantee you that I would have not liked it. And in fact, I probably would have not liked it even more. So I won't wax too poetic about this book since I did talk about it in my last video and you can check it out then. But this book is about Sarah Spain, you know, your typical romantasy heroine. Says she's a badass, but is she really? Is she really? And she meets Kingfisher, which is a red flag number one, his name, Kingfisher, and you know, he's resident, arrogant, MMC of romantasy. Again, the one who grew up reading fantasy, I just don't like it anymore when there is an underdeveloped fantasy world and even more underdeveloped characters. I think there has to be some sort of logical consistency and rules to this world, and it has to kind of make sense. And I don't mean make sense because most in the traditional sense, right? Because most fantasy worlds, you're gonna find loopholes, you're gonna find things, but if they're so jarring that I'm able to see them and it takes me out of the story and it's underdeveloped, it really shouldn't be like that. So I don't tolerate lackluster world building anymore. And I guess I'm a masochist because I keep reading romantasy, hoping that it's gonna be good when there's very actually little hope to be had. As evidenced by all these romantasies that I have DNF'd. But I guess I keep going because I have read 1 to 2 kind of entertaining ones this year, so keep going. I guess I keep going. The next book that I DNF'd is Funny Story by Emily Henry. This one is a contemporary romance. It's about a woman named Daphne who has a fiance. His fiance runs off with with her childhood best friend Petra, and Petra is actually dating Miles. And so Daphne and Miles end up being roommates to each other and they end up falling in love. I think that Emily Henry and I need to depart, sad to say, because I just think plainly that her characters are really boring. They're super vanilla. There's nothing different between her characters from each of her different books. And I've only read like 2 to 3 of her books, and I think that was enough for me. And world problems, and I'm not one to complain about people having first world problems, right? People have them, whatever, but it's just so painful. It's just so painful in these books that I just can't do it anymore. And it's just the same old with each sort of book. So there is that one. DNF is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. Now this one is a little controversial, right? I just won because President Snow doesn't really have much of a backstory. And by have much of a backstory, I mean from the very beginning of the book, he seems to be the same person as he was at the end of the book. And I don't think I'm the only one who says that. I think a lot of people on Goodreads reviews say that as well. And I don't understand the point of having a book, especially a villain origin story, where the villain stays the same throughout the entire book, right? What is kind of the point, right? And I think at this point, I'm kind of over the Hunger Games. Don't get me wrong, I adore the original trilogy. I think that's such an important series. With each subsequent book, I'm realizing that it kind of follows a formula, right? You have a character that you've seen in the original trilogy, and we want to follow them, right? And I think that's why Haymitch's story was so popular as well. I do think that with each book though, right, we have to have like a Hunger Games in there. And I'm starting to feel like the whole appeal of these books is the Hunger Games and past characters, which I think gives me kind of the ick, because why are we reading about the Hunger Games and these people getting killed over and over again, when the point of the original trilogy was that the Hunger Games was made for entertainment, right? And we're still reading about it, because here's the thing, these books would not be what they are without the whole concept of the Hunger Games, right? And so each book has to have a Hunger Games component to it. So I think that's to its detriment now, because I don't think it's saying anything new about this world. And I really actually don't see a point in having like the Hunger Games concept, just like the arena portion of the books in these books anymore, because we understand the point of them, we understand why it's not great. That's kind of my opinion on that. The next book kind of hurts actually. It's The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I am so sad about this one because I absolutely adore the Night Circus, but I mean her descriptions in this book are just as good as they were in the Night Circus. I mean, they are so vivid, so beautiful, but I'm realizing that descriptions itself don't really carry the book for me. The characters in this book were really flat, and there was just almost too much mystery, right? Each kind of sentence was a mystery. I didn't really feel like slogging through the book in order to figure out what was going on, is basically it. So the final one in this video that I'm going to be talking about is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This one is difficult. So this book, if you don't know, is about it's basically a rom-com in an alternate universe where the American president is a woman, and it's the love story between her son and the British prince. So Alex Diaz is her son, and the British prince is named Henry. And they sort of have a rivals relationship at the beginning of the book, and slowly they get to know more about each other and start to fall in love with each other. Great concept, right? And especially in these times, what a comforting scenario. However, my issue with this book is that it reads so painfully written by a millennial woman, as a millennial woman myself. There were so many fanfic references, so much weight put on what People magazine says about them. It really was a bit painful. It was a bit cringy, and I really think that because it's a romance, it cannot give the amount of depth that it probably wants to with the politics, right? Because they do talk about talk a little bit about politics in this book, and I think that even just by having some of these political themes in this book, it kind of cheapens the story, because you just cannot, with how frivolous of candy sweet the rest of the story is and the romance is, it kind of cheapens the story to have politics in there, because I wish we had just gone, it really kind of read like a Disney movie, like a Disney Channel movie, and I wish it had kind of leaned into that more so than trying to be realistic about things, because there was not many things that were realistic politically about this book. So that's kind of my take on that one. And I find that the banter and the kind of irrelevant humor of everything was just a bit too much. It was kind of like every line, like every single person in this book had to have like a snarky comeback. So that's just not really my thing. So there's that one. So those are the first half of the books that I DNF'd in 2025. I'm honestly starting to realize that I'm very, very picky about romance and romantasy. I don't like when a romantasy does not have really good world building, a really good romance, and unfortunately that is becoming very, very hard to find. I'm also finding that cozy fantasy is also a bit of a strange line for me. I think with cozy fantasy, I do have to be in the right mindset for it. I think that the best cozy fantasy I've read so far is The Spell Shop by Sarah Beth Durst, where it's super, super fluffy and are also super fluffy. Not to say that it doesn't have serious topics in it, but there's a really good balance to it. And I find that I think that I just don't maybe like humor in or a very specific or campy humor in cozy fantasy. I think that's what I've also realized. I realized that I really like well-balanced books. Things have to have good, if you're purporting yourself as a romance and a fantasy, I would rather you have really good worlding and really good romance, which I think is interesting, because I think a lot of fantasy books that I did grow up with, they have a better fantasy world building and less emphasis on the romance, and I think I actually might prefer that. The thing is, the appeal of romantasy is that it has both in equal measures, right? It has a good fantasy world, it has a good romance, but I think in reality it's really not that way, which is really unfortunate, because a lot of these concepts for these books sound really, really cool, and it's unfortunate the execution doesn't ever really meet that. Let me know what books you DNF'd this year and why. Let's chat about it in the comments. Alright, bye bye, and I'll see you in my next video.